The slap came so fast I didn't have time to react. My glasses went flying, shattering on the polished marble floor of the Pinnacle Club as 150 guests watched in absolute silence. My cheek burned, but the pain in my chest was far worse. Isabella, my son's fiancée, had just humiliated me in front of everyone, simply because I refused to hand over the keys to my penthouse. And Liam, the son for whom I had sacrificed everything, just stood there, his gaze fixed on the floor as if I were invisible. Have you ever felt completely alone in the middle of a crowd? Share that feeling with me in the comments. Deep inside, something had changed forever. That slap wasn't just a physical blow, it was the final straw. The slap came so fast I didn't have time to react. My glasses went flying, shattering on the polished marble floor of the Pinnacle Club as 150 guests watched in absolute silence. My cheek burned, but the pain in my chest was far worse. Isabella, my son's fiancée, had just humiliated me in front of everyone, simply because I refused to hand over the keys to my penthouse. And Liam, the son for whom I had sacrificed everything, just stood there, his gaze fixed on the floor as if I were invisible. Have you ever felt completely alone in the middle of a crowd? Share that feeling with me in the comments. Deep inside, something had changed forever. That slap wasn't just a physical blow, it was the final straw. The silence followed was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered the clinking of glasses and the soft music that had been playing moments before. No one moved. No one spoke. I knelt slowly, my knees protesting against the cold marble, and began to pick up the pieces of my broken glasses. The frame, a simple silver one I'd had for years, was twisted into a pathetic shape. The lenses had splintered into a tiny, glittering constellation of my own humiliation. It felt fitting. This is what my world had become. A collection of sharp, unrecognizable fragments. I could feel the weight of their stares, 150 pairs of eyes burning into my back. Some were filled with pity, I'm sure, others with a morbid curiosity. But not one person, not a single soul, stepped forward. And Liam, my Liam. He remained frozen, a statue of a son, his perfectly tailored suit a stark contrast to the disheveled state of my heart. His inaction was louder than Isabella's shriek, more painful than the sting on my cheek. It was a confirmation of a truth I had refused to see for months. I had lost him. I didn't know when it happened. Was it a gradual erosion, or a single moment when he chose her, her ambition, her materialistic world, over the mother who had raised him? I finally stood, the broken pieces clutched in my trembling palm, and walked toward the exit. The journey across that ballroom felt like miles. Each step was a lifetime. I didn't look at anyone, but I saw them all in my periphery, the blurred faces, the averted eyes, the whispers that started like a rustle of leaves behind me. Poor thing, someone likely murmured. She seems so confused, another might have said. They were seeing exactly what Isabella wanted them to see. A frail, obsolete old woman who was an obstacle to her children's happiness. The first time Liam brought her to my home, 2 years ago, her mask of politeness was nearly flawless. "Oh, it's so quaint," she had said, her eyes sweeping over the comfortable, worn furniture and the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the entire city. The word hung in the air, a polite insult. Liam, beaming with a lover's blindness, heard only the compliment. But I saw the calculation in her eyes as she assessed the square footage, the prime location, the potential market value. I saw her gaze linger on the paintings my late husband, Richard, and I had collected over the years, not for their value, but for the memories they held. To her, they were just assets. In the car on the way to the party tonight, a small, elegantly wrapped box sat on the passenger seat. Inside was a first edition copy of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. I had spent weeks tracking it down after hearing Isabella mention that it was her favorite book. It cost a small fortune, money I could have easily spent on myself, but I wanted to give her something meaningful, something to show that I was trying to understand her, to welcome her. I had imagined the moment I would give it to her, the surprise and perhaps a glimmer of genuine warmth in her eyes. The box was still in the car, a useless monument to my foolish hope. That hope now lay shattered on the ballroom floor, right next to my glasses. Where did I go wrong? The question echoed in the hollow space inside me. Was it when Richard passed and I poured all my energy into ensuring Liam never wanted for anything? Did my quiet, constant support become a safety net he took for granted, one he eventually resented? We had made a conscious decision, Richard and I, to live simply. Visible wealth invites trouble, Helena, he used to say, his hand over mine. Invisible wealth gives you freedom. We drove modest cars, lived in the same apartment for 30 years, and found joy in books and long walks, not in brand names. I had tried to instill those values in Liam. For a long time, I thought I had succeeded. Now, sitting in the driver's seat of my 10-year-old sedan, the quiet hum of the engine, a comforting familiarity, the raw pain began to crystallize into something cold and hard. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. The subtle comments about my age, the suggestions about moving to an assisted living facility, the constant pressure about my unnecessary space, it was all a campaign, a calculated siege on my life. The slap wasn't the opening shot. It was the final invasion, a declaration that they believed they had already won. My hands shook as I reached for my purse on the passenger seat, my fingers brushing against the cold leather of the gift box. I pushed it aside. For years, I had been Helena Vance, the quiet widow, the loving mother, the harmless volunteer. I had played the part so well that even I had started to believe it. But that woman had just been publicly executed. And in her place, someone else was beginning to stir. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over a name I hadn't needed to call in over a year. A name that represented the life Richard and I had built in secret, the life they knew nothing about. The trembling in my hands wasn't from fear anymore. It was the tremor before an earthquake. It was time to remind them who I was. The trembling in my hands wasn't from fear anymore. It was the tremor before an earthquake. It was time to remind them who I was. My thumb, now steady, pressed the contact. The phone rang twice before a familiar, calm voice answered. Helena, is everything all right? Marcus's tone was professionally composed, but I could hear the underlying concern of a friend who had known me for 30 years, who had stood by my side at Richard's funeral. Marcus, it's me, I said, my own voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. I need you, at the Pinnacle Club, immediately. There was a brief pause on the other end. Marcus was a man who measured every word. How immediate is immediately? 30 minutes or less, I said, and bring the legacy portfolio, the complete file, all of it. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. The legacy portfolio was the official name for the life Richard and I had built in secret. It was a Pandora's box of trusts, deeds, and investment accounts that Marcus had managed with absolute discretion since Richard's passing. To open it was to change everything. Helena, he said, his voice low and serious. Once we do this, there is no turning back. Are you certain? I glanced up at the glittering windows of the club on the top floor. I could just make out the silhouettes of people laughing, dancing, and celebrating my public execution. I saw Liam, in my mind's eye, raising a glass of champagne, his arm around the woman who had just assaulted his mother. His weak, handsome smile would be in place, showing not a single shred of remorse. Completely, I replied, the word as cold and hard as a diamond. 30 minutes, Marcus, not a second more. I hung up the phone and leaned my head back against the worn fabric of the headrest. 30 minutes. 30 minutes until their world, a world built on a foundation of my silent sacrifices, would crumble. As I waited, the memories of the past few months flooded my mind, no longer as sources of pain, but as evidence for a case that was now being built in my soul. Just 3 months ago, they had staged what Isabella cheerfully called an intervention. They sat on my sofa, the one Richard and I had bought at an estate sale, and spread brochures across my coffee table. Golden Meadows Senior Living, one read, featuring a stock photo of smiling, silver-haired residents playing shuffleboard. "We're just worried about you, Helena," Isabella had said, her voice dripping with counterfeit concern. "Living all alone in this big place. What if you fell? No one would know for days." Her eyes darted around the apartment, not with worry, but with the acquisitive gleam of a conqueror surveying new territory. "Your mother is right, Mom," Liam had chimed in, a perfectly trained echo. "It would be more manageable, safer. We found a lovely one-bedroom unit. You'd be so much happier." I had looked at my son then, searching for the boy I had raised, the one who used to bring me wildflowers from the park. But he was gone. In his place was this stranger, a puppet whose strings were so obviously held by the perfectly manicured hands of his fiancée. I saw it all so clearly. It wasn't about my safety. It was about my real estate. That night, after they left, I had made a call of my own, to an old friend, a private investigator I hadn't spoken to in years. "Amelia," I'd said, "I need you to look into the financial situation of my son and his fiancée. I want to know everything." What she uncovered had chilled me to the bone. Liam and Isabella were drowning in a sea of debt. The lavish wedding they were planning was financed entirely by high-interest credit cards and personal loans. The luxury car he drove was leased with payments that consumed nearly half his salary. Their apartment, the one they barely afforded, had an eviction notice pending. Their entire lifestyle was a fragile, glittering facade. And my penthouse, fully paid off and located in one of the most desirable parts of the city, was their designated lifeline. But the final, most devastating piece of information had come from a deeper search. For the past 6 months, my son, my own flesh and blood, had been making inquiries with lawyers. He had been researching the legal process for obtaining power of attorney over an elderly parent, specifically looking for precedents in cases of diminished mental capacity. They weren't just planning to persuade me. They had a plan B, to have me declared legally incompetent and seize control of everything I owned. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, far worse than the slap I had received tonight. This wasn't just greed. This was a cold, premeditated betrayal of the deepest kind. Richard's words echoed in my memory. "Invisible wealth gives you freedom, Helena." He had been a quiet genius, a software architect who foresaw the digital revolution long before anyone else. He sold his company in the late 90s, in a private deal that set us up for life, but we never changed our lifestyle. We believed that character was built through work and humility, not through consumption. We had tried to teach Liam that money was a tool for security, not a weapon for status. How profoundly we had failed. I had continued to support him financially in secret, paying off a credit card here, subsidizing his rent there, believing I was helping him through a rough patch. I now realized I wasn't helping him. I was financing his transformation into a monster. The glare of approaching headlights pulled me from my thoughts. A sleek black town car pulled into the spot next to mine. Marcus stepped out, his tall frame immaculate in a dark suit. He carried a heavy-looking leather briefcase. He walked over to my window, his expression grim. "This is it, Helena," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Last chance to walk away." I looked from his compassionate, worried face up to the bright lights of the party that was being paid for with my money, the celebration of a union built on the plan to destroy me. I got out of the car, shutting the door with a solid, final click. I smoothed down my simple dress and stood tall. "I'm not walking away, Marcus," I said, my voice clearer and stronger than it had been in years. "I'm walking back in." We walked back into the Pinnacle Club together. With each step alongside Marcus, I felt the last vestiges of the frightened, humiliated woman I had been moments ago fall away, replaced by a cold, resolute calm. The muffled sounds of celebration grew louder as we approached the grand ballroom doors, which a doorman held open for us without a second thought. The scene inside was one of perfect, choreographed joy. A toast was in progress. Liam stood on the small dance floor, a microphone in one hand and a champagne flute in the other, Isabella clinging to his arm, her face radiant with triumph. "And I want to thank my incredible fiancée, Isabella," he was saying, his voice amplified throughout the room, "who has taught me what it means to go after what you truly deserve in life." The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. Then they saw us. Isabella's smile faltered first, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure venom. Liam's voice trailed off mid-sentence. The music, which had been swelling for the toast, sputtered and died. A wave of silence rolled across the room as, one by one, the 150 guests turned to stare at the source of the disruption. "What are you doing back here?" Isabella hissed, her voice a harsh whisper that carried in the sudden stillness. "Haven't you caused enough embarrassment for one night?" Before I could answer, Marcus stepped forward, his presence alone commanding an authority that Isabella's shrill tone could never achieve. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm, clear, and professional. It cut through the tension like a scalpel. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I am Mrs. Helena Vance's legal and financial counsel. I apologize for the interruption, but there are urgent legal matters that require the immediate attention of Mr. Liam Vance and Ms. Isabella Rossi." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. The word legal had transformed the scene from a family spat into a public spectacle. People shifted in their seats, their curiosity piqued. Liam finally found his voice, a confused and irritated stammer. "Mom, what is this? Who is this man? What legal matters?" Marcus didn't look at him. He opened his leather briefcase with a soft, ominous click and removed the first document. "Mr. Vance," he began, with the chilling precision of a surgeon, "you are hereby notified that the confidential lease guarantee provided by your mother for your residence at the Azure Towers has been revoked, effective immediately. The property management will be informed tomorrow morning. You will have 30 days to secure a new guarantor or vacate the premises." All the color drained from Liam's face, leaving behind a waxy, pale mask of disbelief. "Lease guarantee?" he mumbled, looking at me, his eyes wide with a horror that was just beginning to dawn. "Mom, what is he talking about?" Marcus didn't give me a chance to answer. He produced a second set of papers. "Furthermore," he continued relentlessly, "the series of monthly transfers from a discretionary trust, which you have been receiving under the guise of performance bonuses, and which total approximately $5,000 per month, has been permanently terminated. This includes all funds used for your credit card payments, car lease, and various other personal expenses." A choked gasp came from Isabella. She lunged forward, her pristine white dress swishing around her ankles. "That's impossible!" It's a lie, she shrieked, turning to the guests as if seeking an ally. Look at her. She's a poor old woman. She volunteers at a library. She drives a 10-year-old car. She can't have that kind of money. Her hysteria was a beautiful thing to witness. Appearances can be deceiving, Isabella, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. You, of all people, should know that. Marcus held up his hand to forestall any further outbursts. He pulled out the final document. And lastly, he announced, his voice resonating with finality, the private financial guarantee covering the full cost of this engagement celebration, the venue, the catering, the music, the flowers, has also been canceled. I believe the manager of the Pinnacle Club will be requiring an alternative form of payment before the conclusion of the evening. That was the bomb that hit everyone. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Several guests near the back actually stood up, nervously gathering their belongings. The festive atmosphere had curdled into one of raw panic. You, Liam whispered, his eyes locked on mine. The full, catastrophic truth was finally crashing down on him. It was you. All this time. You've been paying for everything. His voice broke, and for a fleeting second, I saw the lost little boy he used to be. For 3 years, Liam, I confirmed, my voice devoid of emotion. 3 years I spent enabling a lifestyle you used to mock me for not having. 3 years I thought I was helping my son, when I was actually just financing his descent into a man I no longer recognize. But you can't, Isabella shrieked, her face contorted with rage and disbelief. You can't do this to us. Marcus saved his most devastating blow for last. He looked directly at Liam. Mr. Vance, I must also inform you that your mother has elected to amend her last will. All assets previously designated to you will now be redirected to establish the Vance Legacy Project, a charitable foundation dedicated to providing legal protection for the elderly against familial financial abuse. If the previous announcements were bombs, this was a nuclear detonation. Isabella staggered back as if she had been physically struck, a guttural sob escaping her lips. She finally collapsed into a nearby chair, her perfect world utterly and irrevocably destroyed. Marcus closed his briefcase with a soft, final snap. He turned to me. Our business here is concluded, Helena. We turned and walked toward the exit, leaving a scene of absolute chaos in our wake. The last thing I heard was the frantic voice of the club manager making his way through the stunned crowd, a bill in his hand. The silence we left behind us was different from the one that had greeted my humiliation. It wasn't empty. It was filled with wreckage. The 3 days following the party were the quietest I had experienced in years. The incessant, cloying texts from Isabella ceased. The weekly, guilt-laden phone calls from Liam stopped. My apartment, the space they had coveted as a prize, finally felt like a sanctuary again. Joseph, my elderly neighbor from across the hall and a dear friend since Richard's passing, brought me coffee each morning, a silent gesture of solidarity. He had heard the raised voices during their last intervention and had seen the triumphant look on Isabella's face as they left. He didn't need the details. He understood. On the 4th day, the silence was broken. It wasn't a call from Liam, but from Marcus. Helena, he began, his voice grave, they've made their next move, and it's exactly what we anticipated. He explained that Liam and Isabella had retained a lawyer. They had filed an emergency petition with the court for a conservatorship, seeking immediate control over my estate. Their claim, that my actions at the engagement party were proof of erratic behavior and severe mental and emotional instability. They were painting me as a vindictive, senile old woman who had lost touch with reality, a danger to herself and her own financial well-being. They're using your act of self-preservation against you, Marcus said, a note of disgust in his voice. They've collected sworn statements from several of the guests, Isabella's friends mostly, who described your entrance as a demented tirade and my announcements as delusional fantasies. A cold dread, something I hadn't felt even on the night of the party, crept into my heart. I had known they were greedy and cruel, but I hadn't fully grasped the depths of their depravity. They were willing to strip me not just of my assets, but of my very sanity in the eyes of the law. They wanted to erase me, to make me a non-person whose only purpose was to serve as their bank account. Richard's warning, "Visible wealth invites trouble," had been an understatement. He had never imagined the trouble would come from our own son. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "We fight," Marcus replied, his tone firm and reassuring. "We show the judge exactly who is rational and who is acting out of pure, desperate greed. But Helena, you need to be prepared. This will be ugly. They will attack your character, your mind, your every decision." The preliminary hearing was set for the following week. In that time, their campaign of whispers escalated. My friend Amelia, the private investigator, discovered that Isabella had been calling my neighbors, fishing for anecdotes about my eccentricities. She was trying to build a mosaic of a confused old woman, using my preference for solitude and my quiet, simple life as evidence of my decline. However, Liam and Isabella had made a critical miscalculation. They lived in a world of curated images and superficial appearances, and they had fundamentally misunderstood the world we actually live in. They had forgotten about the 150 smartphones in that ballroom. It started with a single grainy video posted to a local blog titled "Engagement Party Meltdown." But the clip didn't show what they wanted it to. The camera had been rolling just before I arrived. It captured in perfect, high-definition clarity the moment Isabella's face twisted in fury. It captured the sharp, vicious arc of her arm. It captured the sound of her hand connecting with my cheek and my glasses flying through the air. The video went viral overnight. It was no longer an anonymous meltdown. It was the story of an elderly mother being publicly assaulted by her son's fiancé. By the time our hearing date arrived, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. My quiet, unassuming life had been thrust into the center of a public debate about elder abuse and familial greed. The narrative they had tried to spin, of a crazy old woman, had been shattered by a single, undeniable truth captured on video. We walked into the courthouse past a small crowd of reporters. I saw Liam and Isabella across the hall, huddled with their lawyer. They looked pale and haggard. The triumphant arrogance was gone, replaced by a sullen, cornered desperation. Isabella wouldn't meet my eye. Liam just stared at the floor, the same way he had at the party. In the courtroom, their lawyer presented their case, painting a picture of my sudden and alarming change in behavior. He spoke of my delusions of grandeur and my financially destructive outburst. Then it was Marcus's turn. He didn't just refute their claims. He systematically dismantled them. He presented the judge with the complete financial records Amelia had procured: the mountains of debt, the pending eviction, the maxed-out credit cards. He presented the inquiries Liam had made about obtaining power of attorney, dated 6 months before the party. He showed the court that my actions were not an outburst, but a calculated, rational response to a long-planned financial and emotional siege. The final piece of evidence was the video. Marcus played it on the large courtroom monitor. The slap, the collective gasp of the guests, my slow, pained retreat. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, watched the entire clip without blinking. She then looked down at the sworn statements from Isabella's friends, claiming I had been the aggressor. She looked at Liam and Isabella. The silence in the room was absolute. Petition for conservatorship is denied, she said, her voice like the crack of a gavel. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney's office to investigate potential perjury based on these sworn statements. She looked directly at Liam, and I find this entire petition to be frivolous and brought in bad faith. Mrs. Vance's legal fees will be paid in full by the petitioners. This court is adjourned. It was over. Not only had they lost, but they were now facing a mountain of my legal bills and a potential criminal investigation. We walked out of the courtroom, and for the first time in years, I felt the heavy weight I had been carrying lift from my shoulders. It wasn't triumph I felt, but a profound, sorrowful relief. I had not won a battle against my son. I had simply survived it. 2 years have passed since the day I walked out of that courtroom. The world looks different now, not because it has changed, but because I have. My apartment, once the silent stage for my humiliation, is now the headquarters for a life I never expected to live. The legal fallout for Liam and Isabella was swift and brutal. Buried under the debt I would no longer pay and now saddled with my substantial legal fees, they declared bankruptcy. Liam lost his job. The scandal had made him a liability. Their glittering facade crumbled into dust, revealing the hollow, desperate reality beneath. They retreated into a cramped suburban apartment, their dreams of grandeur replaced by the harsh struggle for survival. As for me, the tidal wave of media attention that followed the court case was overwhelming at first. But with Marcus's guidance, I realized it was an opportunity. I wasn't just Helena Vance, the wronged mother. I had become a symbol for countless other seniors who were suffering in silence. I decided to use my voice and the resources Richard had left me to honor the values we had cherished. I founded the Vance Legacy Project. It's not just a foundation, it's a fortress. We provide free legal counsel, financial planning, and emotional support to elderly individuals facing familial abuse and exploitation. Marcus serves as the chairman of the board. My friend Amelia heads our investigations department. Even Joseph, my neighbor, volunteers, sharing his wisdom and a comforting cup of tea with our clients. We have helped hundreds of people reclaim their homes, their savings, and most importantly, their dignity. My life is full now, in a way it never was before. The quiet loneliness has been replaced by the bustling purpose of our work. The phone still rings, but now it's from a social worker with an urgent case, or a client calling to tearfully thank us for helping them stand up to a manipulative child. I wrote a book, Invisible Wealth, detailing my story and offering guidance to others. It became an unexpected bestseller, and all the royalties fund the project. I receive letters every day from people who see themselves in my story. "You taught me that no is a complete sentence," one woman from Ohio wrote. "You showed me that setting a boundary isn't an act of cruelty, but an act of self-love," wrote a man from California. These letters are more precious to me than any stock certificate. And Liam? He has tried to contact me 3 times. The first was a year ago, a short, bitter email blaming me for his ruin. The second was 6 months later, a rambling voicemail asking for a small loan to get back on his feet. The third time was last month. Isabella had left him, taking their infant son, Noah, my grandson, with her. His call was laced with a desperate, self-pitying sorrow. He spoke of his struggles, of his loneliness, of the unfairness of it all. He never once said, "I'm sorry." He never once acknowledged the pain he had caused. He was still the boy who couldn't see past his own reflection. He saw his problems as things that had happened to him, not as the direct consequences of the choices he had made. "Mom, I have nothing," he had said, his voice cracking. "She took everything. I need my mother." The words tore at a place deep inside me, a place where maternal love still stubbornly resided. But I had learned the hardest lesson of my life. You cannot save someone who refuses to save themselves. To do so is to drown alongside them. "I will always be your mother, Liam," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "And I will always love the boy you were. But the help you need now is not something my money can buy. When you are ready to take responsibility, when you are ready to apologize, not for what you've lost, but for what you've done, my door will be open." I hung up, and for the first time, I did not cry. I have a grandson I have never met. His name is Noah. The thought of him is a dull, persistent ache in my heart. I have established a trust for his education, administered by Marcus, which he will receive when he turns 18, regardless of whether he ever knows who I am. It's the only connection I can safely offer. Perhaps, one day, he will seek out his own answers and find his way to me. I can only hope. This morning, as I sat on my balcony, watching the sunrise paint the sky over the city, I felt a sense of peace that I once thought was lost to me forever. I had lost a son, but I had found a purpose. I had endured the deepest betrayal, but I had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. My story did not have a fairy tale ending where everyone forgives and forgets, but it has something better. It has truth. It has justice. It has a legacy. My name is Helena Vance, and I have learned that true wealth isn't what you own. It's the dignity you refuse to surrender. And that's where Helena's story ends, not with a perfect reconciliation, but with a hard-won peace. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing to love yourself enough to walk away from those who hurt you. True family isn't just about blood. It's about respect. I'd love to know what you think. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace and dignity? Share your story down in the comments. This is a safe space to connect. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. In our next story, we'll explore what happens when a long-lost secret comes back to change a family's destiny forever. You won't want to miss it. Until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.